Okay, hi there everyone. So today I will be talking about another paper which is known as the Backpropagation and Brain, and this paper was originally published by Timothy Lillicrap in Google DeepMind along with Geoff Hinton. And the reason that I am covering this paper today is because there are some cool ideas which are trying to replace backpropagation, and this paper is like a fundamental paper which was published in Nature, and it has like actually helped us get a lot of fundamental ideas correctly and try to understand like how to invent new kind of learning algorithms. So uh, okay so basically, let's start with the abstract and I will explain it along the way. The point is that there are a lot of notation there is a lot of notation in this paper, and there is a lot of math going on, and I will try to show the math wherever it is possible and try to discuss the algorithm from an intuitive point. But the key point is that you need to understand like what are the big takeaways from here. So uh, so basically, the key problem with backpropagation is as follows that so the key problem with backpropagation is as follows that we have like several layers of the neural network, and generally like when you feed it the input, all the output goes for in the single forward pass, and then the error signals have to come back in order to update like each layer's weights. So at any moment of time you are basically storing two kind of things. You are storing like you are storing like the intermediate activations, and also like you are storing like you are also storing like the gradients of every layer. So this is like two types of parameters which you have to store. And in case of brain, like it is not clear like that the brain calculates these explicit gradients. And since it is not clear, then how does like the brain actually do the learning in itself? So let me give you like an example about like what the authors mean by this problem. So let's say that you have a single neuron which is a neuron f, and if you feed it like a input x, then your output, maybe it is known as uh, let's say your output y is basically f of x, which is x squared. So in this case, like if you have to like compute like the gradient, if you have to like compute the gradient of like y, then it's 2 times gradient of x. So the key point is that you can only compute like the gradient with respect to the input, and the gradient is basically the same as whatever the input is coming, the change in that, but the output will be like the twice of that. So whenever you are trying to propagate new gradients through this network of neurons, each neuron has like its own mathematical model, and you need to know the precise mathematical equation of every neuron. So in order to do backpropagation, you need to actually know the precise computational uh, model of each neuron which is present in your path. So if your data flows like through this path, you need to know the precise function of each neuron. And what happens is that you need to know this neuron function f, and you also need to know the derivative f dash. And this is like really tedious to do, because the problem is that within the brain, like sometimes there is evidence that the structure of the brain is changing throughout our lifespan, and that is known as like plasticity. But like if you assume, the backprop assumes that the structure of the network is constant, like these function f, g and h are not changing during training, and it is not clear how can we train neural networks whose structure also changes on the fly. So the key point is like how do we invent a learning algorithm which can allow training a network even if like its structure is changing. And that is like the same thing which Hinton talked about in his forward paper called model computation. So that's the whole idea. Uh, so let's look here what authors are saying. So they are saying that the backprop uses error signals sent through feedback connections to adjust synapses, and has classically been described in the supervised learning setting. So on the other hand, the brain appears to use its feedback connections for different purposes and is thought to learn a predominantly unsupervised fashion, building representations that make explicit the structure that is only implicit in the raw sensory input. It is natural to wonder then whether backprop has anything to do tell us about learning from the brain. So the key point is, so the key point like which the authors are trying to say here is that the key point like the authors are trying to say here is, sorry, okay, yeah, the key point like the authors are trying to say here is that in the brain like there are these neurons n1, n2, n3, and your when you do like forward passes, your activity goes up through this path. And then when you're doing a backward pass, basically what happens is that in the brain, in back propagation, like it is a really different kind of problem. And let me show you actually that through a figure which they have been kind enough to make. Okay, so if you look here, what happens is that in case of backpropagation, like so let's say that you start from this, let's say you're concerned with this blue neuron and you want to update that. So what will happen is that during the input, like when you send your input activity in, then what happens is that the output like spreads through all of these neurons in the layers. And then in the standard backpropagation algorithm, what happens is that the error signal is actually piped back through the same set of connections. So here like you can see like this is a graph, and it contains like all these edges. And then when you're back, once you have computed like the loss, then the gradient will actually use the same path through which like you forwarded the input, through which like you forwarded the input data. So the point is that so if like you have a neuron and there is a connection between them, then the same connection is used to do like a forward pass, and the reverse of that connection is used to do a backward pass. So this connection is actually bidirectional in nature. However, like the problem is that in case of in case of brain, there is no such proof that the information is actually like flowing in such a different kind of way. So the point is like we are not sure whether like sometimes the information flows in a forward direction or sometimes it flows in a backward direction. It seems like it is flowing, but how it is flowing we don't know. So this problem in backpropagation, like where it is sharing the path of computation, is actually wrong. And that is what like was presented as a major critique of this network. So now the other type of so now the other kind of algorithms which are present, the other kind of algorithms which the authors talk about is basically that what so let's say that you want to update like this, neuron. So the key point of like a learning algorithm is that okay, you have this whole network and you want to train this, and you look at the output of this, and that gives you like a loss, right? So now basically the way like you're trying to calculate the whole thing is that you will try to understand like how much, so every neuron here has a weight, right? W1, W2, W3, W4, and so on till W5. So you want to understand like how much change do you need to make to a weight in order to like get a lower loss, in the output. So for example, let's say you have three neurons here, one, two, three, four, five. You have five neurons here, and you want to know like how much loss is actually happening here. So there are several ways in which you could do it. So what's like one way? So let's say that we are focusing on this neuron. So what will happen is that you will keep like all the neurons fixed. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can keep all these five neurons fixed, and then you have like a output loss. So then what you can do is like you can try to increase the value of this weight W from W plus delta, and then you look at like you look like how the loss is changing, right? So if the loss is like if the loss is getting reduced, then you know that when you increase this particular weight by delta, then you know that okay, that was a good change, and that is actually what you need to do, right? Like that's the correct direction in which you wiggled your weight and your synapse into. So now the key point is that when you are doing this change, what the assumption was that you need to actually hold all the other weights constant. So in this case, like if you're trying to understand how much effect happens when you're trying to change the weight on this connection, then you need to keep like all the other connections, particularly all of these other connections like these blue connections to be constant. So let's calculate. So this is like, this kind of approach is known as a weight perturbation approach. And the core idea behind weight perturbation approach is that, as I said, that you try to like wiggle the weights in a particular direction and then see like what's happening. So in this case, like we had like 1 2 3 4 5. So 1 2 3 4 5 and 6, we had like 6 neurons. So basically, to wiggle, so when we are trying to find the effect of changing like every weight in an isolated way, then the amount of trials we will take will be actually n, where n is the number of neurons in the neural network. And then what will happen is that, if you're in a typical LLM, like it has like a billion parameters, so it will take like billions of trials in order to compute like how much each weight has to be made, how much each weight has to be changed. And you can see like this becomes like quickly very computationally expensive to do. So is there like any other, is there like any other good way to change it? So now what you could do is like, you could like actually you could create like copies of this neural network. So let's say like you have a neural network, and let's say you have a copy of this neural network again. I'm sorry, let me zoom in. So let's say you have a copy of this neural network, and there is like another copy of this. And this time, so in the first neural network, you are trying to actually update, in the first neural network, like you are trying to actually update, let's say you are trying to update this synapse, and in the second neural network you are trying to update this synapse. So what will happen is that, you can do this in parallel by copying the neural network, equal to like the number of neurons you are trying to fluctuate. So in this case, 1 2 3 4 5, if you have 5 neurons, you can create like 5 of these copies, and then you can try doing this on five GPUs in parallel. But the key point is that in this case, if you're trying to learn, it will still, you still have to make like these weight changes to million connections, and it will quickly get like out of the way. It will contain like a lot of compute for even like one forward iteration. So it will take like a lot of time for the neural network to converge. So as you can see, so this kind of approach, as you can see, does not scale up really well. And that was like one of the key ideas which made like backpropagation very successful. And the idea was that you could only compute like, you could compute like the change you need to make to all the weights in just a single backward pass, which uses like a sort of chain rule. And that was like a really good fact. Now, as we discussed that, there is a another way in which like, so the key point is like, if you look from a neuron's perspective, a neuron has a weight w, and what it needs is like a sort of error signal. So the error signal basically tells it, okay, this is the weight, and you either go in, you either increment it by this amount or you decrement it by this amount. So there should be like some way to deliver the error to every neuron in the intermediate nodes of a neural network. And we just discussed that this kind of way is not acceptable, because it is not clear whether we have like same sort of paths, whether we have identical path in forward and backward direction to deliver this sort of error gradient. So what like the authors are suggesting is that actually like the brain contains like two kinds of networks. There is one network in which what happens is like the data goes from bottom up. So you feed the data from like bottom direction to upwards direction. And then there is a separate network, which is responsible for actually propagating the data back from top, like from the top of the network to the bottom of the network. And the key point is that this entire neural network is actually carrying like the error. So it's like carrying the error signal. And what it does is that this neural network, like when you make like a forward pass through this neural network, it will actually tell you, so every layer of this will tell you like how much, so like whatever activation this particular layer will predict is actually the amount of weight change you need to make to this blue neuron. So let me So let me like give you let me try to explain this idea in a very simpler way. So the key point is that, let's say you have a neural network which is containing three neurons. What you so this is like a bottom up neural network in which like you feed in your data, and then what happens is that you are able to compute like the you are able to compute like the you are able to compute like the activations of each of these neurons. And like once you calculate the loss, what happens is that uh, it actually passes through like once you compute this loss, it actually creates like a error signal. And you have like another neural network. What it does is that this output goes through like this neural network, and it has like the same structure as the neural network which was like the neural network which you were trying to train. So in this case, like if you have three neural network of three neurons, and so you will have another neural network which is like going from top down, and it will be of same structure as the neural network which you are trying to train. And every neuron, and when you like make another pass through this neuron will tell you that, okay, the error signal is basically like you need to change the weight of this particular neuron by a amount of 4, and then this particular neuron will be actually predicting the 4. So the idea is that instead of having like just one path like backpropagation, where you do a forward pass and a backward pass, you have two separate networks. There is one network which is actually delivering like the feed forward activities. So this network is known as a type of feed forward network, and this network is actually known as a type of feedback network. So the idea is that there is like a feed forward phase in which you are propagating like the activities forward in a initial phase, and then you have like another network which is consisting of these feedback connections. And what happens is that it delivers the error signal for the feed forward network. So there are two such networks operating in parallel. So if you think about this, like obviously this solves the problem of like this shared path in backpropagation, but it raises like another interesting question. The problem is that this feedback network needs to have like the same structure as the feed forward network. So for example, let's say if you have three neurons here, then obviously you need to like copy like three neurons here, and you need to know that, okay, the output activity of each of these neurons will actually tell you like how much weight update to make to this particular network. So it means that the structure of like structure of like feed forward net has to be same as structure of feedback network. And this is actually not correct in the way like normal brain functions. So what happens in the case of like a normal brain? Let's try to analyze that. So in a normal brain, what happens is like you have these neurons, but like obviously there are several feedback. So these are like feed forward connections which we see in the brain. But there are like several feedback connections which come. But like it has been shown that obviously these feedback connections don't have to mirror the structure of the brain. And the feedback connections like don't have to be these feedback connections don't have to actually these feedback connections don't have to mirror like the exact architecture of the neural network which it is trying to solve, to deliver like the error signal. So uh, all we know is that this kind of like so the neural networks have like this kind of feed forward structure, and then they have like these kind of feedback connections. And all we know is that this feedback connection is somehow delivering like the error information through the neural network in some way. And I will like try to describe like what that way is and like what it's gonna do. So this is like the way. So what the authors here have said is that there are like these five ways to there are like these five ways to optimize a neural network. So one is basically perturbation kind of learning, which is the same thing which I was talking about, in which like you perturb one of the neurons and try to see like what effect it carries over all the other neurons in the neural network. But it requires like millions of trials, which is equal to the number of neurons in your neural net, and that takes like a lot of time. And then the other one is backpropagation. In backpropagation, you have these error signals which is delivered back using the same path which the neural network followed. But again, it is like not acceptable, because in brain it is not understood that the whether like the two paths are identical or not. And then finally, like we have a backprop kind learning, where what we do is that we get rid of like this limitation of having like this shared path in backpropagation by actually having two kind of networks. One is a feed forward network and one is a feedback network, which actually is responsible for delivering like this sort of error signal to each of the neurons in the neural network. Okay, so let me talk about so let me try to let me just cover like what I said. So what they said is, so this one is about like the node perturbation part, which is saying that you can inject like some input into the network, and then you can try to see like how the network is performing. You try to record its error, and if like the error goes down, then you accept the modification. So if you have a weight w, you do w plus delta, and if this delta change actually results in a better performance, then you accept that this delta is correct. Okay. And so this is like the normal weight perturbation, but that does not work correctly. And the key point is that the backpropagation requires access to the exact causal relationship between the synapse strengths and the network's output. So if your network is like having four neurons, 1 2 3 4, then you need to know like the precise mathematical function f1, f2, f3 and f4 to be able to like calculate these gradients, which makes it like really bad in practice. So now that this is clear, let's look at like how a normal backpropagation algorithm works, and then I will try to cover like what are some problems in that, which is actually impacting neuroscientists, and they are not really happy about it.